The global gaming industry is booming and is expected to be worth a massive $312 billion by 2026. The largest streaming platforms have tens of millions of daily visitors and billions of hours of content watched each year. Being a full-time gamer is considered a legitimate profession, and even gaming-specific supplements are being sold to help improve performance. But it wasn't always like this. Gaming has a long and rich history that includes the golden age of arcade games in the late 70s and early 80s, to the home console resurgence and the shift of the gaming epicenter to Japan in the mid-80s. But the gaming we know of today, in which one can aspire to become a full-time streamer or professional gamer, is a relatively recent phenomenon, and it was in the 1990s when a series of factors came together to give birth to the eSports revolution. On the 27th of August 1992, Super Mario Kart was released in Japan for the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. For those who were around at the time, you could generally get a pretty good idea if the person you were up against knew what they were doing. If they chose Toad or Princess on the basis of their superior initial acceleration, you could be confident that the slow start but top speed of Bowser or Donkey Kong Jr. would be enough to get the job done. The release of Super Mario Kart was a massive success for Nintendo, not only because of sales grossing 8.76 million copies worldwide and being the fourth best-selling Super Nintendo game ever, but also because it was bringing the fight back to Sega, which had captured huge chunks of market share from Nintendo within a few short years, and was soon to be releasing Sonic the Hedgehog 2. The Nintendo vs. Sega console war characterized the duopolistic competition that permeated much of the 1990s. WWF vs. WCW, Ghostbusters vs. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Wayne's World vs. Bill and Ted. Growing up at the time, you had to pick a side. You were either Nintendo or Sega, Mario or Sonic, Bowser or Dr. Robotnik. And on a side note, if you were an owner of an Apple Macintosh at a time when Apple wasn't the behemoth of the company it is today, you would, to use more recent terminology, get wrecked. As the early 90s progressed, the Nintendo vs. Sega console war could have gone either way, with each company trying to one-up the other and both claiming to have sold more units than they actually did. Importantly, the competition wasn't just happening somewhere in the hidden periphery of society. Mainstream media was reporting on it. Hotlines were made available so you could speak to an expert if you ever got stuck in a game. New video game magazines were being published, and new television series with video game characters were being produced. Gaming was becoming more prevalent, and there was a sense it was on the cusp of something much bigger. In 1994, the PlayStation would be released in Japan and in the United States the following year, marking Sony's entry into the console wars, which it would quickly come to dominate. Console gaming had grown substantially since the mid-80s, with a variety of genres contributing towards the competitive player element that gaming could offer, and with PC gaming also coming into its own in the 90s. There would be one genre in particular that would sow the seed for today's global esports revolution. A first-person shooter or FPS video game is one in which gameplay is experienced through the eyes of a protagonist, who has free rein to move within a three-dimensional space, often with a weapon in hand. Wolfenstein 3D was released in 1992 and exceeded expectations in sales and public reception, but it was Doom, released the following year, that's arguably one of the most influential games of all time. The movement, the weapons, the lighting, these all demonstrated the innovative capabilities offered by this new genre of video games. But in what would be instrumental for the later growth of esports, Doom brought to prominence the deathmatch. The adrenaline rush and excitement experienced during a deathmatch was unparalleled at the time, opening up new possibilities for competitive gaming. Some companies would even have to ban Doom because staff were busy shooting at each other when they were supposed to be working. The success of Doom validated the potential of the FPS genre, and its multiplayer capabilities set the scene for the development of other iconic titles in the 1990s such as Quake, Duke Nukem, and Counter-Strike. In addition to the novel concept that the first-person shooter was, gameplay was also becoming more sophisticated. Looking back at Super Mario Kart, even before a race started, there would be a predetermined sequence of positions for the console-operated characters, i.e. which characters were set to finish first, second, third, and so on. Let's say Bowser was picked to come first. Now if that sequence was disrupted, for example because of a player taking out Bowser with a shell and putting him in 5th place, the system would attempt to re-establish the original sequence before the race was over. Time permitting, it would try to place Bowser in 1st place again. Within first-person shooters, that uniformity of character behavior would be displaced by unexpected but pleasant surprises. In Quake, for example, you'd notice that it wasn't always the protagonist against its enemies. Instead, if a shambler hit a fiend with its lightning bolt, the fiend wouldn't just ignore it, the fiend would go after the shambler. And then there was the interactivity. In Duke Nukem, along with fighting against an alien invasion of Earth, you could turn on a theater projector, use the bathroom, look in the mirror and realize, damn, I'm looking good.
Damn, I'm looking good.
The FPS genre provided gamers with liberation, the freedom to explore, and was pushing the boundaries of expectation. And while competitive gaming was largely confined to inviting friends over to your place, arcades, and some local area networks, something would soon arrive that would change the face of gaming and the world forever: the advent of the internet. In 1990, 2.6 million people had access to the internet. By the end of the decade, that number had exploded to 414 million and would rise exponentially in the following years. The internet would bring about a monumental change in the world of gaming. While connections weren't great on a 28.8K modem, it greatly expanded the selection of gamers you could compete against, much more so than the localized competition one was limited to before the internet. Gamers could now have a deathmatch against someone down the street or on the other side of the country, and would very often rage when someone at home picked up the landline, terminating their dial-up connection and crashing the game they were in the middle of winning. Multiplayer matchmaking platforms started to sprout up, such as Kali, Wireplay, and Total Entertainment Network, providing a central hub from which to compete against an even greater number of gamers. To combat the limitations of slow connection speeds, people would try to find a workaround. In Duke Nukem, for example, at the start of a deathmatch or Duke match, players would say "waiting for sync," indicating that they wouldn't move for the first 30 seconds of the game, with the intention of this somehow making gameplay more stable. People with cable modems were particularly popular, and gamers wanted to play against them, because cable modem connections provided a degree of stability in an era where high latency was just an accepted part of multiplayer gaming. Some of these multiplayer platforms held regular tournaments and prize-based competitions, pushing the motivation of competitive gaming beyond the thrill of the win to a point where recognition and reputation would become just as important. As in the offline world, community would have just as much appeal in the online world, as gamers started to establish the first clans. It helped, of course, that games such as Quake had specific team deathmatch modes. Some clans recruited the best players, presenting an aura of exclusivity. Without any idea of what eSports would eventually become, people would try to get better so they could have a chance of being recruited. Tryouts would be held, and in message boards, gamers would discuss what abilities were required in order to be considered. And through the internet, gaming emerged as a medium through which to socialize and build friendships. At the time, there was considerable divide between those who were part of it and those who didn't understand it. Some of your best friends could have been people you'd never met in person. Some of the most hilarious moments in your life could have happened while gaming in a team deathmatch. And so gaming wasn't just a place to compete, it was becoming a place to bond. While some people dismissed gaming and the internet as a waste of time, others were keeping an eye on developments and saw that despite the limitations, there was potential. But another important change was occurring due to the internet. With greater exposure to competition, you would soon learn in first-person shooters that skill could only take you so far. In May 1997, Dennis Thresh Fong defeated Tom Entropy Kimsey at the Red Annihilation Quake tournament in Atlanta, Georgia. This was a seminal moment in esports history because it set a precedent for esports competition prizes. Thresh would walk away, or more accurately, drive away with a Ferrari, and it also helped to formally establish who some of the best players were. Out of the ambiguity of scattered, decentralized online matches, consensus was now forming about who constituted the best of the best. And when you played the best, it took a lot more than skill to win. Strategy was essential. In Duke Nukem, to be a good player, it wasn't just about aim. Leveraging spawn points could give you a massive advantage. Spawn points were locations where your opponent reappeared or spawned after being killed. With your headphones on and some spatial awareness, you could develop a fairly good idea of where your opponent had spawned, and with that information, understand what weapons they had access to and where they might be headed. If used correctly, leveraging spawn points could allow you to rack up enough kills to give you a significant lead. In Quake, the best players leveraged item control and timing. By denying your opponent access to armor, not only would your attacks inflict more damage on them, but you would also be more resistant to their attacks. by timing the collection of certain weapons, you could deny your opponent map-specific advantages such as a rocket launcher in closed spaces or a railgun in an open map. There was a lot of strategic thinking that would go into each decision. To those unfamiliar with gaming, it was just mindlessly pointing and shooting. But those who were in the deep end knew that the best players not only had enormous talent, but had also done enormous research. By watching the best, the gaming community would learn a few tricks. As primitive as it may sound, in the early years of FPS online gaming, a large chunk of players were unfamiliar with strafing, the act of moving left and right to dodge incoming fire and to circle your opponent. In Quake, damage from your own rocket fire was initially associated with carelessness, but then the rocket jump became an indispensable move in many people's gameplay. In Duke Nukem, players learnt about location-specific bugs, in which you pressed the crouch and jump buttons simultaneously, allowing you to move through a wall and collect items you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Just like in regular sports, competitive gaming had become complex enough that if you weren't good at one thing, you could be good at another, and that could be good enough to get you the win. This was amply demonstrated in August 1998, when Clan 9 competed against Death Row, which happened to include Thresh. Death Row had some immensely skilled players, but ended up being decimated, because in a team deathmatch, as in other team sports, teamwork was more important than individual skill. As the 90s progressed to the latter part of the decade, perceptions were slowly changing, and media outlets started suggesting that perhaps being a professional gamer could one day become a full-time career. While games had primarily focused on their single-player modes, many were now being developed with their multiplayer capabilities at the forefront. Duke Nukem could have been the FPS series to take eSports to the next level, but its sequel took forever, and that is a different story altogether. Quake 1 and Quake 2 had significant single-player experiences, but Quake 3 was multiplayer-focused, and when Quake 3 Test was released in May 1999 to test Quake 3's network technology and graphics compatibility, it was utter carnage. Dozens and dozens of players squeezed into a map, pushing the limits of 1990s internet connectivity. If you could get a rocket launcher and simply hold down the fire button, you were pretty much guaranteed to rack up your frag total. To some, it was a letdown that Quake 3 had decided to forego a dedicated single-player mode, but to others, multiplayer gaming was the future. It was also the time the dot-com bubble was in full swing, with venture capital companies throwing money into dot-com startups. The internet was all the rage, and gaming was about harnessing its potential, not avoiding it. So when Quake 3 Arena was released in December 1999, some gamers didn't see it as just another game. They saw it as an opportunity. One of those gamers was Jonathan Fatal1ty Wendell. At the Razer CPL Championships held in April 2000, Fatal1ty steamrolled the competition and walked away with $40,000. On gaming forums, the following days and weeks were full of discussions not just about the performance itself, but also about what it took to get to that level. It had been revealed that Fatal1ty had a dedicated schedule of practice, sometimes putting in up to 10 to 12 hours a day. In an era when eSports was in its infancy, people ridiculed the idea of spending so much time playing video games. However, other people pointed out that from the perspective of someone attempting to make gaming their full-time profession, a concept that barely existed, it was entirely appropriate to spend hours a day practicing. Fatal1ty would later step it up and bring in other professional gamers into his training camps and request non-disclosure agreements so no information could be leaked about his strengths and weaknesses. After Razer's CPL in April 2000, Fatal1ty was considered the best Quake 3 player in the world. Much like discussions today about Jordan or LeBron, Ali or Tyson, Ronaldo or Messi, people wondered who would win in a dream matchup between Fatal1ty or Thresh. Although Thresh had retired in 1997, one of his many legacies continued in the popularization of the WASD directional controls that thousands of gamers were adopting, and even today is the default control scheme in many games. Similarly, people scoured the web to download Fatal1ty's config file to learn about his field of vision and mouse sensitivity settings, with the intention that they'd find something in his configuration setup that could give them an advantage. With esports competitions becoming more frequent, Quake 3 also helped to give rise to streaming, another aspect of gaming that would prove to be industry-changing. People didn't just like playing games, they liked watching them. Tournaments welcomed viewers to watch their favorite players through Quake's spectator mode. Forum members talked about the pros and cons of different strategies, and people would download demos of the most exciting matches, hoping they could learn a thing or two from the best in the world. In retrospect, it may seem obvious that streaming would take off. Millions of people watch their favorite sports, so why would it be any different for gaming? One of the reasons is that public perception back then still resisted the idea of gaming as a sport, and it would take the better part of a decade to demonstrate there was a market of millions of people interested in watching video games. While these developments were able to showcase many of the positive aspects of gaming, by the turn of the century we were witnessing the embryonic stages of the negative, in particular the toxic elements of online competition. Years earlier in Duke Nukem 3D, aimbots were already in use, and people regularly cheated in tournaments using the record function, which allowed you to determine your opponent's location. In Quake, if you relied on the lightning gun, you were a noob. If you were skilled with the railgun, you were leaked. If you were a lurker or camper, you deserved to get pwned. Anything other than using a mouse and keyboard meant you weren't a real gamer, and in the times of 36.6 and 56.6K dial-up modems, you would get hated on for having a low ping. But despite these setbacks, the scene had been set. As time said goodbye to the 20th century and moved into the 21st, gaming was now on a path that at the beginning of the 90s, few people could have imagined. When gaming tournaments were held in the late 90s, some people were adamant that esports would never take off, that it would never be respected. Time has proven this to be incorrect. In 2022, over 400 professional gamers earned more than $100,000 in prize money, and the top 5 earned close to $2 million. Sponsorships are widespread. Gaming coaches, courses, and boot camps exist to help you play better. Streaming can be a full-time profession, and gaming is becoming more closely integrated with the Olympics. While this video has focused on the advent of the internet and first-person shooters in the 1990s, there is certainly recognition of other genres and factors that have helped make esports what it is today. Other titles such as Counter-Strike and GoldenEye helped push forward the FPS genre. Xbox Live and the PlayStation Network, launched in the 2000s, brought millions of people into online multiplayer gaming, and mobile gaming has come a long way since Snake on the Nokia 6110, with revenues now exceeding those of console and PC gaming. The 1990s provided us with a way to connect, with the global gaming industry valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, and as we're now more connected than ever, what's next in the evolution of esports?